Okay, everyone, glad to be with you today and welcome. I'm your co host today. My name is Jessie, and I'm thrilled to introduce our speaker, Vitalis. Vitalis is a lead engineer from Babylon, and we also have Kevin with us. So, as most of you probably already familiar with Kevin, he is our co founder and engineer. And Kevin will also be your co host for today's episode. So before we dive in, I would like to invite Vitalis to quickly say hi to the community and introduce yourself and Babylon a little bit. How about that, Vitalis?
Hi everyone, very glad to be here. So I'm Vitalis, I'm the lead engineer at Babylon. And what I'm doing at Babylon is basically I'm leading the technical efforts for the deployment, for the development and deployment of our protocols and coordinating all the different projects that we have going on. And what Babylon does is we are developing protocols to scale Bitcoin and share its security with the decentralized world.
Awesome. Thank you, Vitalis. So we recently integrated with Babylon. And just one more thing before we get started, I would like to want you to know that if at any time during the AMA, if there's any question you would like to ask about Nibiru or Babylon, or just anything about cross-chain security in general, feel free to post your question in the comment section so we can answer them real time. So without further ado, Kevin, would you like to take over the floor?
Yeah, for sure. Vitalis, thank you so much for coming on. Really excited to have you. I think Babylon's working on some really, really cool and advanced stuff, and really looking forward to asking you some questions and diving deep into it today, as well as bringing up some of the questions the community had as well. So I guess to start kind of at the beginning, what were you like? What are some of the main differences between proof of work security and proof of stake security? And how does Babylon really like bring the best of both of them together?
Thank you, Kevin. Yeah, so I will start with proof of work and use Bitcoin as an example because Bitcoin is the big proof of work thing. In proof of work, you have slow finality. For example, on Bitcoin, on average, there's 10 minutes per block. But the more you go back in time, the more secure you become. So the latest block is less secure than the block before it, and this block is less secure than the block before it, and so on, until you get like something like 100 deep. At what point it's nearly impossible to have a fork, like for the chain to be reverted. It actually has never happened in Bitcoin's 14-year track record. On the other hand, with proof of stake, you have fast finality, like blocks get produced and are finalized in the chain every few seconds. But the more you go back in time, the less secure you become. And this is because the main mechanism in which proof of stake chains achieve security is by being able to slash offenders of the protocol. So the more you go back in time, for example, if you discover a misbehavior 1 year ago, 30 days ago, there's a real possibility that the one that performed the offense is now unbonded, and therefore you can't punish them if you discover it now. So this is what we call long-range security. And of course, there's the short-range security concept in which basically your chain does not have a lot of value. It's not a very big chain. So it is easy for someone to acquire enough stake and take over the network.
So how does Babylon help in both the long range and the short range cases?
Yeah, so what we're doing at Babylon is we're trying to bring the best of both worlds. So we use in order to protect against the long range issues. We use Bitcoin as a time stamping server. So actually, to take a step back, what Cosmos does to protect against the long range issues is basically a social consensus, because you need someone keeping track of which is the correct chain. So through social consensus, for example, snapshots, people are able to identify which is the correct chain and protect against forks. What Babylon does is it uses Bitcoin as a time stamping server, as the person that is always online to keep track of which chain is the canonical one. So that's for long range protection. For short range protection, you have some new protocols in the Cosmos ecosystem, that is mesh security, replicated security, and also Babylon has designed and proposed a protocol called interchain timestamping.
That interchain timestamping sounds really cool. Does it work in parallel, in conjunction with interchain security, or would you say it's like something that can be used in place of interchain security?
I would say it's a complementary protocol. So what basically for short range security, what happens is people so basically the protocols that have been proposed basically want to enhance the security of smaller chains by the security of a provider chain, by the economic security of a provider chain. So replicated security, for example, shares the entire economic security of a provider chain with the consumer chain. Mesh security focuses on building economic alliances between chains and enhancing the security of both chains. Interchain timestamping again tries to get the whole economic security of the provider chain by basically having the consumer chain timestamp its headers inside provider chain and using those timestamps in order to perform fork resolution. So if someone wants to fork the consumer chain, they also need to fork and revert the timestamps on the provider chain. And the good thing about this is that interchain timestamping already happens because IBC connected chains need to maintain a light client with each other. And the headers that are contained inside the light clients can actually be considered timestamps. So basically it's here, but we're lacking the APIs to utilize this to get a short-range economic security.
Fascinating. That's really cool. So one of the issues with Bitcoin is that it has limited capacity for carrying arbitrary data in its UTXOs. How does Babylon handle this issue?
Yeah, so is it okay with you, like, if I take a step back and give a description of the timestamping protocol? And
Yeah, please.
then, yeah, sure. So the Bitcoin timestamping protocol, which we have developed and we have deployed in our current testnet, with which Nibiru connects to, is basically a protocol in which chains connect to Babylon through IBC, and Babylon creates Bitcoin checkpoints for them. So those checkpoints can be used as a double confirmation for important transactions. You can think of it like as a second layer of Bitcoin finalization. And when you think of it, like in Cosmos, there are already transactions which have two levels of finalization. For example, the unbonding request, I consider it as a transaction which has two levels of finalization, because the first level of finalization is the Bitcoin, the unbonding request getting included in a block, and then the second layer of finalization is that enough time passes for the unbonding request to be granted. So what we're doing with Babylon is we are creating those Bitcoin checkpoints for the chains to help them protect against long-range attacks, and those and basically those checkpoints can be used for the second layer of finalization. And one use case, for example, is using this second finalization to execute unbonding requests more securely without relying on social consensus.
So does that mean that you can unbond faster if you're a delegator or a validator?
Yeah, definitely. So in the current Babylon testnet, the unbonding time is around 20 hours. It was 16 hours before, but then all of this BRC20 craziness happened. So it got a bit higher. And this unbonding time is slightly dynamic because it is based on the security parameter that you set for Bitcoin. Basically, how much, when do you consider a Bitcoin checkpoint finalized? For example, in Babylon, inside the Babylon chain, we consider a checkpoint to be finalized if it is 100 deep on Bitcoin. So what Babylon does is it submits a checkpoint to Bitcoin and continuously reads the state of the Bitcoin ledger in order to identify the status of this checkpoint, how deep it is. And once it reaches a certain depth, it considers the checkpoint to be finalized, and the blocks that this checkpoint timestamps are considered to have the second layer of finalization, and then you can execute unbonding requests.
Does that mean that consumer zones like Nibiru, rather than hard coding, like for example, a 21-day unbonding time, we can dynamically query Babylon chain via IBC to determine whether or not to grant unbonding requests?
Yeah, so the way it works with other chains that connect to us through IBC. So in order for Babylon to create checkpoints for the other chains, it needs their headers. So similarly with interchain timestamping. So basically you need to have an IBC Lite client, a one-way IBC Lite client from Babylon to the connected chain like Nibiru, for example. And what we get from the Lite client is we get the headers of the connected chain. And those headers are committed inside the state of Babylon. And since Babylon is checkpointed, then its entire state is checkpointed. So what Babylon does is it gets those timestamps for the connected chains like Nibiru, and through IBC, it can communicate to them that their timestamps have been included on Bitcoin and the depth of those timestamps. A very important consideration here is we have designed the Babylon system so that connected chains do not have to trust Babylon. So in our design, what we send to the connected chains is not only okay, your checkpoint is deep enough. We actually send them the Bitcoin ledger, which they can verify, part of the Bitcoin ledger, which they can verify, as well as inclusion proofs in both Babylon and on Bitcoin. so that the connected chain does not need to trust that Babylon actually gave it the correct data. It can verify it itself. And yeah, based on those checkpoints, this chain can make all kinds of decisions based on this second layer of finalization. One such decision could be execute unbonding requests. Other decisions depend on the business logic of the connected chain. So we were talking with other people that do not care about unbonding times, but they care about having a second layer of finalization for some other important transactions.
Yeah, I think one really cool use case of Babylon also is to be able to commit snapshot hashes onto the Bitcoin ledger, such that when a new node joining the network doesn't have to trust any peers, it can trust the Bitcoin ledger for correct app hashes at certain heights and state sync from those hashes. Is that also something that Babylon would support?
So does this relate to weak subjectivity? Can you elaborate on this use case?
Yeah, for those who don't know what weak subjectivity is, can you give a brief explanation about it, like a high level overview, and then maybe explain how Babylon solves this problem for new nodes joining the network?
Yeah, definitely. So I will actually kind of steal a definition that I've heard Zaki Manian give to describe what Babylon does. So a slightly altered version. So for example, with Bitcoin, you can start, you can be you might be running a node in a cave, and then your internet shuts down for 5 years, and when it starts back up, you want to sync with the network. If you connect with at least one honest individual, then it is certain that you will reach the correct canonical chain, because Bitcoin has a clear and simple fork choice rule. The chain that has the most energy committed to it is the canonical chain. With Tendermint based chains, you don't have that, because actually Tendermint does not have a fork choice rule. Once it sees a fork, it panics. So that's the weak subjectivity definition I would give. So you don't, when you start back up, you might get dishonest and honest forks, and you will not be able to differentiate between them, which is the long range issues that I was describing before.
Gotcha. So then a new node joining the network can now, with Babylon, look at time-stamped hashes on the Bitcoin ledger to determine which chain is the canonical chain.
Yeah, exactly. With Babylon, now you can have a fork choice rule for Tendermint based chains. Basically, and maybe I could give a definition of the long range attack before I explain what happens. So in the long range attack scenario, someone, a validator that is no longer bonded, they go back in time at a block height in which they are still bonded. And what they do is they create a fork of the chain. And yeah, this fork looks valid. It has enough signatures, but it is not the real one. It's not what people follow. And the newcomer to the network, the person in the cave, for example, might reach this block height and connect with an honest individual and this malicious validator, and both they are going to send them different chains. And this person in the cave does not know which one is the correct one. So the solution that that Cosmos-based chains are using up to this point is social consensus. So basically, what happens is the community agrees on what the correct chain is, and people, for example, validator companies or the chains themselves create snapshots which people can download and start syncing from. However, this does not completely solve the problem, and this is and given that social consensus is slow, this is why we have long unbonding times, because we want to be able to catch the perpetrators if they do it, not allow them to unbond very fast. At Bitcoin, at Babylon, we feel that this is not a very rigid approach. And what we propose is that we instead use Bitcoin as a timestamping server that's always online, that contains those timestamps, and chains and people syncing with the network can use Bitcoin to identify which chain is the canonical one through the simple fork choice rule that the chain that has the earliest timestamp is the canonical one.
Could you also use the timestamping service to figure out if anybody double signed?
Yeah, definitely. Basically, with the timestamping service, you ensure that if someone can't trick their network, they can still double sign, but you ensure that they are going to get caught if it matters. So, for example, consider that someone in this attack scenario that I described before, someone goes back in time and creates a fork. So if they create a fork before the timestamp, before the canonical chain is timestamped on Bitcoin, then this fork can either be hidden, and if you timestamp it, then it's no longer hidden, or it can be like shown. In both cases, the perpetrator can get slashed. And if they do it, if they checkpoint after the canonical chain is checkpointed, then their fork won't matter because people can choose the correct can do a fork choice rule and decide on the canonical chain.
That's cool. So Babylon is IBC connected, presumably a Tendermint-based Cosmos chain. Why did you pick Tendermint and Cosmos proof-of-stake chains to build Babylon?
Yeah, so Tendermint is a solid BFT-based protocol with a track record which suffers from the problems that other proof-of-stake protocols suffer as well. And using Tendermint, we can also use the Cosmos SDK, which is a very good development platform with a very vibrant community around it, which enables us to focus on the Babylon protocol itself and to not have to implement all the blockchain specifics. And a very big part on our decision is the existence of the IBC protocol, which solves a lot of issues for us. So, for example, we can easily connect with other chains. We can easily receive checkpoints from them through the IBC like clients. So we thought that Tendermint plus Cosmos SDK is going to be a very good starting ground for us.
Right. Given the IBC protocol and being connected to all the other zones in Cosmos, can you tell me a bit more about the scalability that achieves and how that kind of makes things more efficient when timestamping to Bitcoin?
Yeah, definitely. So, as you mentioned before, Bitcoin block space is expensive and scarce. There are only a few kilobits per second available. And as we have seen recently with the BRC20, like craziness, fees went extraordinarily up high. It was very difficult to get included. So what Babylon does is it acts as a checkpoint aggregator, where we have focused a lot and we have developed novel technologies to make our impact on Bitcoin as minimal as possible and as secure as possible. And basically, we have ensured we have developed mechanisms so that the checkpoints of the other chains that connect to us are verifiable as well, which would be much harder if each connected chain tried to checkpoint itself into Babylon, because it would need some or to replicate some of our technologies, and there would be many chains competing for these slots on Bitcoin, which would make it much more difficult.
Right. So given the costs of operating a timestamping service on Bitcoin, can you talk a little bit more about like the economic model of Babylon and how it aligns with the incentives of validators?
Yeah.
This question is from a community member, King Alp.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, so maybe I should start with talking about how we minimize our impact on Bitcoin so that we don't have to pay a lot in transaction fees. So in order to have a valid checkpoint, you can't just checkpoint the hash of the block. You actually need to checkpoint also the validator set signatures, as well as some other minor stuff here and there that is useful for verifying and using the checkpoint. But initially, when we started developing this, we saw that timestamping the validator signatures of Cosmos validators would be very costly, because those signatures are big and there are many validators and Bitcoin space is limited. So in order to combat this, we introduced the concept of BLS signatures into our validators, which they are required to have. So each validator actually needs to produce BLS signatures every time we want to checkpoint. And what we do is we take those BLS signatures and and BLS provides the wonderful mechanism of being able to aggregate signatures. So we take those signatures and we aggregate them, and we end up only with 48 bytes for all the signatures, compared to, I think, even more than 1,000 bytes if we just use the Cosmos signatures. So combined with the hash and the other stuff we include, in the current testnet, we checkpoint 148 bytes of data every 35 minutes. To checkpoint them, we use the op return mechanism of Bitcoin, and we're also investigating using Taproot to drive our costs even lower. So, what was the second part of the question?
How does it align with the incentives of the validators? And how is it secure and sustainable over time?
Yeah, sure. So in order to include those checkpoints into Bitcoin, you need someone creating those Bitcoin transactions and paying for the fees. And you also need someone reading the state from Bitcoin and submitting it into Babylon, because Babylon internally maintains a Bitcoin Lite client, which requires paying for gas costs. So what we have right now is we have developed a set of programs called the Vigilantes, which can, in Cosmos lingo, can be described as relayers between Babylon and Bitcoin. So in the current scheme, those relayers are paying for those costs out of pocket, those vigilantes, but this is the same for actual Cosmos relayers between Cosmos chains. So currently we're working on mechanisms to incentivize people to run vigilantes, but much more like relayers, you only need one honest one in order for the protocol to function effectively. So yeah, like we are working on incentive mechanisms for vigilantes, and we are also engaging with the community to find ways to incentivize IBC relayers, because we believe that currently it's a very big issue that IBC relayers are running at a loss. We all rely on IBC. IBC is the main thing holding the entire upchain ecosystem together. So we need to find much better ways to incentivize people to run relayers and reward them for the work.
So to double touch on these vigilantes, are they similar? Are they cryptographically secure like IBC, in the sense that it doesn't matter who operates them, that as long as the proofs get submitted or the transactions get submitted to either chain, they're safe?
Yeah, that's exactly the same.
Gotcha.
In this sense, you just need one honest one submitting stuff to Bitcoin and submitting stuff to Babylon.
I think there's also a vigilante master monitor, right? What does that vigilante module do?
Yeah, so the vigilante monitor is a tool that is used by entities that do not trust the Babylon network, in order to ensure that everything is going fine. So basically, what the monitor does is it connects to both Bitcoin and Babylon and checks whether checkpoints created by Babylon are included into Bitcoin, and whether Babylon effectively receives the state of the Bitcoin chain, that is, the Bitcoin headers and the checkpoints created on Bitcoin. This is mainly to protect against two types of issues: liveness, in the sense that Babylon does not receive the latest Bitcoin headers or checkpoints, and censorship, so that validators do not censor valid checkpoints, so that malicious ones get included on Babylon.
Gotcha. So it's like a watchdog for the ecosystem. Yeah. Cool.
Exactly.
So you brought up censorship. There was another question by Jack K from our community who asked, it's more related to transaction censorship, but how does Babylon's use of BTC timestamps enhance the censorship resistance of POS chains? So I guess it's more about transaction censorship here.
Yeah, so this is another use case of Babylon that has currently not been developed, but we have designed a mechanism in which basically someone from a connected chain can submit, can say to Babylon, hey, my transaction is getting censored, what's happening? And they send like a proof that they have sent this transaction or something like that. And what Babylon can do at this point is enable the connected chain to enter into a rollup mode, in which rollup mode, basically the validators are only responsible for validating the availability of the data within the POS blocks, while the blocks are actually getting created and committed into the Babylon chain. So the Babylon chain defines the ordering of the connected chain's blocks, while the validators are only need to sign those and ensure data availability for those. And yeah, so given that Babylon is checkpointed into Bitcoin, people can get the canonical Babylon chain based on the Bitcoin timestamps. And then they can get the canonical POS chain based on the timestamps inside the Babylon chain. And we exit rollup mode once we ensure that censorship is no longer happening. And this leads to only a half of the validators of the connected chain needing to sign blocks instead of 1/3. So therefore boosting the censorship resistance of the connected chain.
Gotcha. That's cool. Another question from our community from Onek. As Babylon continues to evolve and enhance the security of POS chains, are there any plans to integrate additional cryptographic technologies or novel approaches to further strengthen the security of the BTC timestamping process? And what are the potential future developments in this area?
Oh yeah, that's a good question. So yeah, there are various. So overall, yeah, we're developing some new protocols, but in terms of what we would very likely be interested to be using is the ABCI++, developed by which yesterday I learned is coming, at least the alpha is coming to the next Cosmos version. Why we want ABCI++ is because, as I said before, validators need to have BLS keys and create signatures based on those BLS keys. So the ABCI++ vote extension mechanism would make our job much easier in implementing those BLS signatures, and basically using instead of working around this to introduce those signatures, we can include them directly using the assistance of Tendermint. Also, as I've said before, we are currently using op returns to include the data into Bitcoin. And yeah, that's because when we started out, we initially thought that Bitcoin people would not like us using the Bitcoin ledger space, because I don't know if people are aware, like in 2014, 2015, there were all of those op return wars in which people were fighting about how much data they should allow for people to include. And yeah, we worked really hard to make sure that we have the minimal impact possible on Bitcoin, and using something standard like the op return. But recent developments have shown that people are okay with using Taproot as well, and this would actually slightly reduce our fees and impact on Bitcoin by around 10%. So we're also considering replacing op returns with Taproot. And yeah, again, like incentivizing both IBC relayers and our Vigilante programs.
Nice. So I guess that kind of ties into the next question from the community from Pendekar Biru. What are some of the key milestones and goals that Babylon aims to achieve in this year, and how do they align with the broader vision of scaling Bitcoin and securing the decentralized world?
Oh yeah, definitely. So yeah, we're currently running our first testnet. We call it an alpha testnet as it is unincentivized. And we have 25 chains, including Nibiru, that they get Bitcoin checkpoints. So I think to note about this testnet is that chains are connected to us and receive Bitcoin checkpoints, but the chains do not know about those checkpoints. They do not make any decisions based on those checkpoints. For example, enable unbonding requests and stuff like that. So we call phase one getting Bitcoin checkpoints. Phase two, getting Bitcoin checkpoints and knowing about those and making decisions based on those. So in phase one, we only need the one-way IBC relayer, that is a Babylon IBC Lite client towards the other chain. For phase two, we need the normal IBC relayer, a two-way one in which people can communicate both ways. So yeah, this testnet has been running for about 4 months, I think, and in the next week or so, we're going to launch a new testnet, again unincentivized, but very much improved over the previous one, in which we enable smart contracts through CosmoWAS. So in order to see what cool things people build on top of Babylon utilizing Bitcoin security, while we are also enabling the possibility of chains receiving, knowing about the Bitcoin checkpoints and taking advantage of them to make decisions. To that end, we are currently in the testing phase of a smart contract that can be deployed on the connected chain. And this smart contract is IBC enabled, and it communicates with Babylon in order to receive the Bitcoin checkpoints and everything else needed to verify those without having to trust Babylon, and also notifying the underlying chain about those checkpoints and their validity so that this chain can make decisions based on those.
Cool. That's exciting. Really looking forward to that progress. Just one more question for you, Vitalis. What sort of partnerships and collaborations are you looking for in the ecosystem, and how can we help?
Oh yeah, definitely. So basically, our solution scales no matter how many people connect to us. So no matter whether 10 chains or 1 million chains connect to Babylon, the checkpoint, the impact on Bitcoin is going to be exactly the same size. So what we say on Babylon is, like, if you want to receive Bitcoin checkpoints, the more the merrier, in the sense it's an IBC connection, the impact is minimal. Babylon can communicate with a lot of chains in the Cosmos ecosystem in order to spread the word and lead to adoption and utilization of Bitcoin security. We think like a very good use case, but not the only one, of the BTC checkpointing protocol is the reducial of unbonding times. We think that this is especially going to be very useful for DeFi protocols like Nibiru, because it will enable liquidity. For example, you might be able to exit a liquidity pool or like unbond and get your assets liquid much more faster. And yeah, like what we're working on is adoption and interoperability with our chains.
And it's not just to bond faster, but now people have verifiable proofs on the Bitcoin ledger that their transaction was included in the canonical chains and they can't get long range attacked. So it's improve security and user trust as well.
Yeah, exactly. So the faster unbonding times are a byproduct of the enhanced security. The slow unbonding times were introduced because due to security concerns, and Babylon solves those security concerns.
Awesome. Looking forward to partnering with you guys and integrating with your testnet, your new testnet coming out in a few weeks or a couple weeks, very soon. And looking forward to achieving phase 2 with the IBC connections. Thank you so much for your time, Vitalis. Definitely learned a lot from you today. And thank you all for coming to our AMA today.
Thanks a bunch. This was a great conversation. Thank you for having me.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.